name's Kevin Basil. I was a sergeant in the Army from 2003 until 2008. I did 2 tours in Iraq, once in 2005 and again in 2007. I'm originally from Brockway, Pennsylvania. I was at Penn State in 2001 into 2002. And I was just disillusioned with what I was doing. I was a journalism major, but literature was my passion. So I wanted to find a way out, so to speak. I was starting to party too much, and I was losing focus in my studies. So I saw the Army as a way to escape. My journals are actually some of my most valuable possessions. I didn't identify as a veteran, so I didn't want to talk about it at all. I told only a few select people that I actually was in the Army, but for the most part, I really didn't identify with it at all. So it wasn't until May of this year, 2012, that I started to go to the Warrior Writers workshop. I actually found it through. I was doing a project with the Rosenbach Museum in Center City, and it was an exhibition that actually just opened this Veterans Day, where they took journal entries from Civil War veterans and other artifacts, and they compared them to artifacts from soldiers who had served post 9/11. So I worked on this project, and I'm actually in the exhibition. I tell a couple of stories, and I actually got connected to Warrior Writers. What I noticed with Warrior Writers was I was starting to conjure up a lot of experiences that I hadn't thought about before, and I think that it had to do with actually sitting down with other people who had similar experiences. So definitely, I don't have PTSD, but a lot of members actually do. So it's always interesting to see how those experiences connect and how veterans have different experiences. So it has been therapeutic on one hand, and it has made me more aware of veteran concerns, and you know, just it has helped me to identify with you know, veterans in general. I guess what I find I usually end up writing about is the stresses of how you're supposed to act as a veteran, like what a veteran is actually supposed to be, because our society has this idea of you know, the veteran should be this uber patriotic person who is a hero, who identifies with all of these, you know, pro-military sentiments. But Warrior Writers is apolitical, so it's something that helps me to come up with my own identity. In terms of therapy, I think that what is most helpful to write about is experiences that have to do with explaining to family members or friends what actually goes on in war, and how much of it is actually skewed by the media, how much of it is actually misrepresented by politicians. So this is something that Warrior Writers is something that allows these stories to come out in a more raw form. So, for example, I actually I was actually on a detail in Iraq where we had to load caskets, and this was an event that I never talked about. So Warrior Writers actually helped me to write this story about being on a loading detail, and you know, it was a difficult story to write and read, but it was something that I never talked about, and then, you know, it allowed me to discuss that. Every veteran has a different identity, but oftentimes the media and even like older veterans have this idea of how veterans should be portrayed or how a veteran should act, but it's not always black and white, obviously. Um, so it's always interesting to see at the workshops how each person has a different identity, how they identify as a veteran, and how those stories actually come out in terms of their personality, and the way that they remember their experiences. Those two things are always interesting. One thing that's really helpful is to hear when another veteran has a common experience. I've always been self-conscious about talking about my experiences, so the first time that I did an entry and um, I read it in one of the workshops, I was nervous about it, but then after I did it, it felt like a weight had been lifted. And incidentally, my first entry was about walking down the corridor in Bangor, Maine, after returning from Iraq. Yeah, so it was definitely a load off. What I would say to veterans today is to help establish your own identity. You need to talk about these things, and you need to actually make connections with your community. You need to try to articulate what your experiences were in Iraq or Afghanistan or the military in general. People need to know these things because people need to make informed decisions. So on one hand, veterans have a responsibility to communicate what the military life is like, and on the other hand, like I said before, programs like Warrior Writers are therapeutic.